Well, a happy Sunday. I'll skip the elongated warm up. We are here in New York. We are about to get blanketed with a lot of snow. We're going to get at least a foot, 18 inches, 20 inches, 8 inches. Nobody really knows, but we are going to get a lot of snow. It is a significant storm. We got a few flakes going on right now, but sometime this evening it will begin in earnest, and we're really in for it. So pretty much, unless you absolutely positively have to be out on the road, like you work for a hospital, cops, EMS, stay the fuck home and don't risk your life. And I hate to say it, because I was the kind of person, I'd be going to Bev's gym in a fucking blizzard, and it wasn't very intelligent of me to do that. You understand where I'm coming from. All right, we got the awful weather out of the way, and I'm still thinking about the passing of Robert Duvall, and I'm thinking about the people from his generation and the way that, not so much in this instance memory, but life, when we assess other people's lives, there is just so much of it feels entirely random. So I'm going to throw some names at you of people who were born in roughly the same, like within a year, and some of whom are still with us, two of them to be precise. And some of them have been gone for 70 years. Another is gone for more than 30 years. And another is gone for more than 40 years. So when Robert Duvall passed last week, many people, they said very similar things about Gene Hackman, who has now been gone a year. The words were very, very similar, because there were a number of people when Hackman passed that said this was the GOAT. This was the greatest living film actor. Yeah, Daniel Day-Lewis, Bobby D, Pacino. It was Gene. Nobody had what he had. Nobody had the ability to seem authentic in the way that he did, to make every character feel real, even in really shitty movies like Loose Cannons with Dan Aykroyd in 1990. Very similar things were said about Robert Duvall. And one thing we can hopefully agree on is that both Gene Hackman and Robert Duvall did exactly what they wanted to in their chosen artistic endeavor. And virtually everyone who worked with both of those men did nothing but shower bouquets of praise. The way that Gene Hackman would prepare, and the way Robert Duvall seemed to go out of his way to try to connect with members of the cast and crew. That he also was very similar to how you imagine him. That's one of the things they said about Diane Keaton when she passed. Whatever you think she was like, that's what she was like. She was goofy and quirky and funny and eccentric and delightful to be around. Duvall was a pro's pro, and seemed like a really good dude when the cameras weren't rolling. So Gene died at, I think he was 90, had just turned 95 when he passed. And Robert Duvall also passed at 95. Both men, well, Duvall was born in 31. Gene was born in 1930, January of 1930. So the two people of that era, I mentioned Clint Eastwood, and there was another enormous name, but he wasn't necessarily, he didn't start his career in Hollywood proper, Michael Caine. Michael Caine is 94 going on 95. I believe he was born in 1931. Now, he's retired as far as I know. He's not still working, and Robert Duvall was still working into his 90s. He did the movie Hustle, didn't have a big role, but he worked with Adam Sandler, a number of years ago. I guess that was 2022. But Michael Caine is, I think he needs the use of a wheelchair now. You hope that he's feeling well, he's not suffering in any pain. And Clint Eastwood, by all accounts, is still active, and he supposedly has been looking at scripts since, not really success. Juror Number 2 is a really good movie, but nobody saw it because I don't know what David Zaslav was doing. Maybe he just doesn't like Clint Eastwood, but Clint didn't make enough money for Warner Brothers over the 6 decades? What? But Clint supposedly was looking at scripts, and the reality is, if the man from El Paso is well enough and he wants to make another movie, someone is going to fund it. Someone's going to fund it, because he showed he still had, whatever the it is, he still had it, because Juror Number 2 is a beautifully directed motion picture. But now you start to think to yourself, why do certain things happen to certain people? And how much of this is all just luck? How much of this is random chance? James Dean has been gone more than 70 years. He's been gone 70 and a half years. James Dean was born in 1931. If he were still alive, he would be a year younger than Clint Eastwood, and he died in September of 1955 in a terrible car wreck. 70 plus years ago. That's how long James Dean has been gone. I'll give you another name. If you're under 40, even if you're a movie fan, there's a chance you've never seen a film with this guy, Steve McQueen. Not the filmmaker. Steve McQueen, the legendary, iconic actor, Oscar nominated. He wasn't necessarily known as that great of a thespian. He was closer to Clint Eastwood. Clint Eastwood was closer to Steve McQueen in terms of performance style, in terms of having impossible, off-the-charts screen presence without being a Gene Hackman, a Robert Duvall, a Daniel Day-Lewis, a Pacino, a Bobby D level thespian, craftsman. Steve McQueen was only 50 when he died. He was born in 1930, a couple of months before Clint Eastwood, but it could have been a few months after. The point is, McQueen only made it to 50. He was 50. He died of mesothelioma. How horrible, how fucking random is that? He was in the Navy, and they think that some of that shit got into his lungs because they used to line the ships with asbestos. And a lot of places, schools. You know, you had janitors, and I hate to be so negative, but there were janitors in schools all over Long Island who ended up with that they ended up with mesothelioma because the asbestos was how they kept the schools warm. They weren't doing that to try to hurt people, but they didn't know the long-term effects of this crap that they used to just put to make the places. It seemed like a good idea at the time. But you think of McQueen. He's been gone 45 and a half years. And in the way that Gene Hackman and Robert Duvall could play similar parts and were looked upon as very similar in terms of the authenticity and how grounded they were, it's easy to see if Steve McQueen had not died of mesothelioma. Let's say he just never got mesothelioma and he continued to work in the movie business. I could see him fitting very comfortably into a lot of different Clint Eastwood roles in the 80s and 90s. If you know who he is, if you know Steve McQueen and you know his history, his filmography. I can't picture Gene Hackman in The Line of Fire or Robert Duvall. But I can sure as hell picture Steve McQueen playing an aging Secret Service agent, 12, 13 years after he passed, but an aging Secret Service agent who is still potent, who is still resourceful, who is still in his own way a lady killer, somebody who likes jazz, someone who can play the piano. That role would have fit Steve McQueen like a glove. And Absolute Power, Clint's last kind of leading man type of role. A jewel thief, right? McQueen, that right in his wheelhouse, Thomas Crown affair, right? A jewel thief who sees the President of the United States, played by Gene Hackman, commit a capital crime while he's committing a capital crime, and what are you going to do about it? Well, in the world of the book, the character of Luther Whitney, his instinct is to just flee. You know what? I don't think that I can take down a president of the United States when I'm the one who is the career criminal. This is not really going to work out. But at a certain point, that character of Luther Whitney just says, fuck all y'all, I'm coming to get you. But gone for so long, so tragic. Steve McQueen, only 50. Only 50. And the other legendary name who was born in 1931 is Mickey Mantle, the baseball player, the lifelong New York Yankee, one of the greatest baseball players who ever lived. And Mickey Mantle lived a full life. You could say he lived too full of a life because every man in his family was dead before they turned 40. And Mickey's assumption was, well, I'm going to die anyway. I might as well live it up. He had the off gene. He had the gene for long life because Mickey Mantle, despite abusing his body basically every day for decades, drinking to excess, almost every day for decades. It was liver cancer that took him. And I can't even imagine the amount of pain he was in at the end of his life. But he died at 64. And there was an idea that if, it's a cliche to even say it this way, if I knew that I was going to live as long as I did, I would have taken better care of myself. But it makes you think how random all of this is. And how you have to live in the moment as much as possible and be present as much as possible. Because, yeah, Clint Eastwood lived a very healthful life, no question about it. And from what we can understand, so did Gene Hackman, so did Robert Duvall. But Steve McQueen, he was just, I guess if you want to use the word guilty, he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he got sick through no fault of his own. He was not doing anything actively to make himself sick. Just terrible luck. And, that's what I've been thinking about. One kind of humorous, what I was kicking something around with Robert Duvall and Gene Hackman, who, as much as I'm a savant, and we joke around about it on this channel, I'd forgotten when I was just saying to myself the other day, well, Hackman and Duvall had to have worked together, right? Yeah. But I just, vapor locked. I had to Google it. Francis Coppola's The Conversation. Many people to this day would consider that's Gene Hackman's best performance. The fact that he didn't win the Oscar for that is a disgrace. It's a cinematic travesty. And no offense to Art Carney, but Art Carney was up against Gene in The Conversation and Jack Nicholson in Chinatown. You can also make the further argument that not only is Chinatown Jack Nicholson's best performance, but that is his finest hour and 50 minutes of cinema. Jack Nicholson in Chinatown. How did either of those two guys not win? Pacino could have won for The Godfather too, right? You're talking about, I don't even understand how Art Carney, I'm sorry. I can't even begin to imagine. But there are these moments in cinema, and this is more of a lighthearted thing. There are moments in cinema, there are famous lines that get repeated, and you see it on TikTok and in the social media era when young people think of Jack Nicholson, even if they haven't even seen The Departed, they know, here's Johnny, and you can't handle the truth. When young people think of Gene Hackman, they've probably seen the clip from Unforgiven where he keeps mispronouncing the phrase Duke of Death. He keeps saying Duck of Death. He's doing it deliberately because the Richard Harris character in the Clint Eastwood, speaking of Unforgiven, the Richard Harris character, that was the first Albus Dumbledore, he is known as the Duke of Death. He's a gunfighter, he's British, he talks about how great the Queen is, and well, you have a president, you suck, and it's just really negative, and the guy kind of deserves a beatdown, and he gets one. But he's known as the Duke of Death. But Gene Hackman, as Little Bill Daggett, refuses to acknowledge this guy's legend. He says, I knew him. He really, he's really not as great as you think he is, he says to the biographer, the Saul Rubinek character of Beauchamp. But he keeps calling him the Duck of Death. The Duck of Death. And he gets corrected a couple of times. It's the Duke. Duck, I says. Duck, I says. Now that's a famous exchange. That is a famous moment in the film, and it might have been the moment that won Gene Hackman the Best Supporting Actor Oscar. Maybe. Maybe at the end it was, this isn't right, I'm building a house. Whatever that has to do with the price of tea anywhere. You're building a house, so what? What? Robert Duvall has a moment in his next to last Oscar nomination, a movie that I've mentioned on the channel, and I talked about it in the Robert Duvall episode, A Civil Action, where Duvall all but steals the film from John Travolta. And when I tell you how difficult that is, that's one of Travolta's top 5, possibly even top 3 best performances. He had some Oscar buzz, that is Travolta, for lead actor. The movie just didn't hit critics as well as it probably should have. I mean, it's fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, but that movie should be in the 80s, and it's in the mid to high 60s. I don't know what movie they saw. Maybe there was a little John Travolta fatigue. No clue. But Duvall plays this kind of homespun, old-fashioned Southern attorney who is way sharper than he first appears, based on a real guy named Jerry or Jerome Thatcher. And he's a little bit eccentric. He has certain things he'll do in service of his client. We get the idea that he's a fantastic attorney, and we never have to see him bend the law. This is a guy who is probably going to go to the highest bidder, but you get the idea he has a moral center and a compass. And as he's getting ready to defend this huge conglomerate against John Travolta's a true life guy, Jan Schlichtman, he meets a couple of attorneys who are going to be assisting him in the case. And the irony is he doesn't need any assistance. He can do the job. I'm fine. I'm good. You guys can just sit in the fucking bullpen. I don't really need you. You do whatever you got to do. So one of the characters, one of the young attorneys, a very well dressed kind of kid, he's wearing a $30,000 watch he's got no business wearing. Like one of those kind of people. He doesn't like him immediately. So the guy introduces himself to Robert Duvall's Jerome Thatcher as his name is like Douglas Cheeseman. Now, I knew one kid growing up who had the last name Cheeseman, and I thought it was kind of a funny name. I'm sorry, I thought it was a funny name. So the first time watching the movie A Civil Action all those years ago, and the guy identifies himself as Cheeseman, and I start to giggle, because I think I'm remembering this kid, and he used to get made fun of because of his name. And Robert Duvall as Jerome Thatcher does not acknowledge that this man's name is Cheeseman. At that point, and every other time in the movie, when he refers to this guy, he does not call him Cheeseman. He does not call him Mr. Cheeseman or Counselor Cheeseman. He calls him Mr. Cheeseman. And every single time that Robert Duvall says that phrase, obviously you're not supposed to laugh, but you can't help it. Because he doesn't look like the sort of guy who would even do this, that would even get involved in this kind of shenanigans where he's ripping on a guy because of his last name. To hear Robert Duvall go, Mr. Cheeseman! I think he says it 4 separate times. It's gold. So that didn't catch on. Maybe because the movie, A Civil Action, was kind of a dud at the box office. You look at the gross, it made about $60 million. The film inexplicably cost $75 million to make. That's crazy. So by virtue of that, it was not a box office success. But it's difficult to kind of put in a bottle, why do certain lines become legendary and others, just people like me, remember? 1992, Put That Coffee Down, the Alec Baldwin in Glengarry Glen Ross. That's another one that young people, many of whom have probably never seen that movie, they know that. They know Put That Coffee Down. But in 1991, Louis Gossett Jr. had a moment that is just as good to me in the movie Toy Soldiers. Die Hard in a Prep School, right? That was when Hollywood was doing Die Hard on a plane, Die Hard on a boat, Die Hard on a mountaintop, Die Hard on a train, Die Hard in a sports arena, and Die Hard in a prep school. There's a moment in that movie where Louis Gossett Jr.'s headmaster, if that's even, you're allowed to say that, headmaster of this elite prep school with a bunch of wealthy kids who are very, very poorly behaved. And Sean Astin, as the most poorly behaved of these kids, is just driving Louis Gossett Jr. crazy. And Sean Astin's character, he drops a banana peel. Banana peel drops to the ground. And the way Louis Gossett Jr. goes, pick up that banana. That didn't catch on because that movie was not a big enough box office hit, I guess. But anyway, I'm more or less rambling. That was not my intention. The idea of this episode was to just point out how random and how crazy when you start to compare people from different eras who have been gone so long. And, there are different levels. There are different levels of tragic. Steve McQueen lived an incredible life in his 50 years, but he was taken decades too soon. Mickey Mantle also lived an extraordinary life, and to some extent, Mickey Mantle hurt himself with his abuse of alcohol and not taking care of himself. The excuse, if you want to say, well, I'm going to be dead before 40. You should still try, in my opinion, you should still strive to take the best care of yourself possible. And James Dean, 24 years old. Beyond horrendous. And he still had incredible achievements just in his very short lifespan. The movies he made, like Giant and Rebel Without a Cause. You're tearing me apart. Who knows what he could have gone on to become. But we still have Michael Caine and Clint Eastwood with us. Clint born 1930 and Michael Caine born in 1931. And on this soon-to-be blizzardy Sunday in New York, these are just some of the thoughts that I had. And, Robert Duvall was one of the all-timers, and so was Gene Hackman. They were friends. They knew each other back in New York before they hit the big time. And, it's the cycle of life. That's the way it goes. Treasure these people while they're still here. And, I hope you have a good rest of your Sunday. And I'll probably be doing another episode or two as the weather gets worse, because why not? I always have a lot of stuff to talk. Oh, I got to talk about. I always have a lot of stuff to talk about. So I hope you're having a good Sunday. It is still technically Sunday morning, and I'll see you all again real soon. Peace.